This segment, we're going to be referring to the book of Stanford Social Innovation Review, chapter Grappling with Systems Collapse, and our translators are Liz Rudy, Tom Glacier, and Rachel Reichenbach. Okay. This chapter talks about social change in organizations in a system or society that may no longer be valuable, right? So this idea of like social change in organizations, kind of don't think that captures really the accurate description for what's discussed here, but it does get in terms of actually the giving the accurate emotional response to this particular idea here. But we'll talk more about it regardless. And in terms of this idea, this concept, I think it speaks to societal collapse. And I definitely think we need to start to consider at least the possibility here, right? And explore it, right? Taking steps to think out what you would do, and what that would mean for you, your community, and your actual family, right? And there's a book that I think really speaks to this topic of actually like the power of envisioning this idea and this event is imaginable. Okay. In this book, Jane McGonigal, and Jane's a director of game research and development, and in this book she talks about particularly some telling experiments and some telling projects that she's been a part of. And for this particular idea, I really think it's pertinent to mention how in 2010 she exposed a lot of participants in a certain experiment to pressures that were very similar to the COVID pandemic. Okay. For all my conspiracy theorists out there, I don't know if Fauci was there. I can't say that for sure, but I will say I feel like Jane definitely has a sense of credibility I would attribute to her based on no real understanding of who she is. But I like her. I like the book. But I will say, after the pandemic, her team took this opportunity and reached out to the past participants for interviews and to see how they handled the pandemic, the actual pandemic. And it was found that they were much quicker to respond and more resilient to the changes that COVID required people to really get used to. And this idea, the power of actually just walking through even just a tad bit, you don't even have to completely immerse yourself in the scenario, but starting to walk through and understand those things, what you would do, what it would require, that does give you an element of real power in the future. So let's see, in terms of this idea, right, our translators here note how the underappreciation of the moment could be disastrous for organizations and honestly I feel like society as a whole, right? Because the Dragon King event describes a shock that may very well tear the system apart and render it useless for the future, right? And our translators talk about a systemic understanding around understanding the collapse in general, okay? And what to expect in terms of the organizations and the systems that are in place, okay? And we won't dive deep in here because I feel like there's all types of trouble I could get into here. I don't even know if there's any type of trap holes, but starting to think about that is extremely important. And this is a quote straight from the particular reading, right? The Three Horizons framework, originally developed by McKinsey and Company, but since reimagined by Bill Sharp and others in the Futures and Foresight community, provides a helpful way to understand this dynamic. The collapsing system, essentially Horizon 1, which is shown in green, its descent into non-viability, steepening dramatically after a Dragon King event. Horizon 2, in orange, represents the intermediary period marked by chaos and uncertainty, but also experimentation and the stress testing of nascent norms and institutions. Horizon 3, in purple, is the system that eventually emerges, and perhaps reflecting some aspects of Horizon 1 and Horizon 2, but ultimately different in its attributes, behaviors, and outcomes. Okay? Now, the translators, they talk about how attempts to preserve or return to normal could prolong the period of chaos and uncertainty, which is shown in orange. But I also think the reactionary response that many of us may be more easily guided to, it would play into the hands of characters who are planning for the collapse. Okay? And this is pure speculation at this point, right? We're just hypotheticals. We're just talking. Now, I think a lot of us are in shock by many things being done by this administration, but I want to point out that really this idea of what's going on and how it's taking place, it does appear to be sanctioned by the deep state, okay? And we could be looking at a liquidation, okay? In terms of this graph, there could already be a design ready for Horizon 3 or the purple line. And I must say, I don't think that we would like it. Now, they talk about different systems of collective action and how they can impact this particular idea, the network shown here, or the graph shown here, basically, right? And one is essentially a protective system that may be closely aligned with mutual aid groups, right? This system can speed up a more appealing emerging system, or a different Horizon 3, which is shown in purple, okay? Now, this could, like, in terms of people who don't understand what actual mutual aid groups are, it's essentially just groups of people, communities, organizing and creating systems already, right? So these people would essentially be more resilient in scenarios like a Dragon King event, but also more willing to understand and be moving into a Horizon 3 rather than trying to uphold a failing system. Number 2 is a blocking system, which they describe as a collective stubbornness that will slow down the collapse of Horizon 1 in green here, but also it would help the rise of essentially or it may help the rise of more appealing systems, or slow down the rise of less appealing systems, okay? That depends on the resistance, of course, okay? And this is essentially just not being obedient, okay? So not necessarily just going along with the flow. And you can obviously see how that would slow down Horizon 3. And this is the third system they talk about is a disruptive system. And this can be described as really a collective protest. And given the organizing nature behind protest, it may help create an emerging system built around the wants and needs of the majority. Okay? You get together in a protest, you have to organize. When you organize, you're already talking amongst each other, the people around you, the neighbors. The understanding, the collective already kind of starts to have they already start to kind of build the Horizon 3 unconsciously. So we have that. But now the last one, which is a creative system. It sounds a lot like the Foundry, okay? And it's built around the just imagination and designing of an appealing system that can even be more appealing than the collapsing system as a whole. And this is something that we understand that society's failing. I don't think people are willing to push back on the idea that we live in a sick society. We need a new system regardless. Okay? And that is something that we should certainly start to grow to understand. Okay? And that's very much the spirit that I really started to design the Foundry in. So even, like I said, even if you just look at the Foundry and pick from it what you like and what you don't like, or if you just want to kind of have conversations about creating your own system, I'd totally be open and willing to do that, depending on just how much I got going on at the moment. Okay. Now, also, I think we should be aware of this, the increase in possibility that we're looking at today, right? Because I've seen just a few things just now that are just, now definitely things are definitely going off the rails, but I've been seeing things build up to this moment in general, right? There's a few things I want to mention here. One, politicians caring very little about how they are perceived by the public. Okay? This is coming from the idea of Epstein, the Epstein case, and with Gaza and Israel. Okay? Two is I've seen, particularly this is something that I haven't seen in the media, but the rise of private military contractors and their use. Okay? Our army is subbing out a lot of military action already. I'm not going to speak too much to this, but that idea is very worrisome. Okay? Now, also included in number 2 is there's a growing divide between the citizens and the soldiers or the actual military itself, right? We have a tremendous gap in understanding our civilians understanding the soldiers, right? But also just understanding how we're guided in our morality when we take action versus how our country is guided. It is insane, and that goes back to the element of just, I guess, Gaza in general. But kind of starts to speak to that like a little bit, I'll say. And for number 2, there's an increase in military budget, right? This is despite the clown show that Doge was. They decided to increase the military budget. That's anybody who had really an understanding and a deep appreciation for how Elon Musk was taking on the system and going out his way to fire all the people who were regulating him and the park rangers or whatever. I don't know. I recently kind of had a touch the grass moment where people started to where I kind of talked to people who believed what Elon was doing was okay, and that maybe it was just the Democrats that were just being loud about this. But that increase in the military budget was a straight huck to a spit in your face. That was not that was when we're talking about corruption, corroding a system that's corroding. The Department of Defense, they give our money to the 1/4 to 30% of our defense, but of the contracts they give out go to the same 5 defense contractors. Those same 5 defense contractors are have homes in Washington, right? The corruption is so, for anyone who knows, it is so in your face. It is absolutely disrespectful. But that rise in military budget was a spit in the face, and I want you guys to understand that. Also the idea of the insane wealth inequality. It's getting out of hand. It's getting completely out of hand, especially when you think about the rise of private military and contracts and what that could essentially lead to. Also, the rise of private equity and BlackRock. They are literally devouring towns. It is not like they are able to, right? It's like they don't have any real regulations or meaningful regulations to worry about in a lot of cases. They're just doing it, and it is disgusting what they're able to do. Check out More Perfect Union, and just private equity in general. And this idea of Palantir and the weird tech bros, right, and Doge in general, but Palantir getting this power, I want you guys to understand something. The FBI got a lot of power under J. Edgar Hoover. They didn't have to disclose that. That was not disclosed to the public when they increased the power of their surveillance system, right? They don't have to necessarily, we hear about things and it disappears in the news, but those things are very those things have those things continue in terms of how they live and what they do. And in this renaissance, I think we need to at least contemplate this idea of societal collapse and loosen our reliance on really a government, particularly when they're just allowing the quote-unquote world's richest man to buy the president. And I say quote-unquote because I'm just the more seasoned, really rich people, they're going to know how to hide their money in foundations and different nonprofits or whatever. They know how to get around certain things like taxes. Elon Musk might be just he new to the top 10 Forbes list and really view that as some kind of status symbol or something, but he doesn't. I don't think he really understands a lot about how this idea works, but he does have friends he has friends that definitely understand power. They don't, and they understand that when you get to a certain level of wealth, power shouldn't be seen, that's the concept. Very, very different. But in any way, this guy going to quote-unquote buy the president and cosplay as an elected official and fire government workers while he's pretending to fight corruption, if you're a government worker that was fired, you should view your country betrayed you. That's what happened. That's what that was. That was a betrayal. That was a bipartisan betrayal. That was not, oh my God, the Republicans, they don't even care. No. That was bipartisan. That was a betrayal. That was the safeguards to keep you employed and doing your job. You need to understand something. That is government. That was a systemic understanding that these people could be fired. There were no safeguards. There was no military to come and just smack some sense, and some Seymour Hersh figure to come in and smack Elon Musk and say, "Hey, stop this." There was none of that. That these things just happened. This was a betrayal by your government, your system. Trying to go back and revive the system may not be worth it, especially when we look at what happened in Gaza in general, it's a very disgusting system that we have in place, and it may not be fixable. But at the very least, we need to think about what happens if it does collapse and what we would do. And like I said, even if you don't agree with the Foundry concept, I'm going to invite you to take a look at it, and also subscribe to my Substack, where you have the option to also get my paywalled articles around the Foundry research and development section. Okay, I think that I'm non-biased, but I think those are the best articles ever written, ever.